What's the one thing every woman listening, and maybe there's a man listening too? I actually wouldn't pick hormones or lipids. I would pick a test that you need a doctor's prescription for. There's a roadblock. It's going to cost you $100. That's not a big roadblock. It's called a heart calcium CT scan. And if you just think about it for a minute, women are recommended age 45, mammogram, maybe some want to get a thermogram or an MRI, self exam. Guys get a prostate exam. Everybody's recommended a colonoscopy or Cologuard. Done with the examination, see you in a couple of years, and end of story. Where was the screening that you're on a road to a heart attack? Maybe at age 62, but at age 45, that's not a bad age to pick it up.
Dr. Joel Kahn, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast. I am so honored to have you on today.
Well, it's about time. I thought it was a gardening podcast, root cause, and then I figured out it was a medicine podcast. So it's a good combination.
Not only is it a good combination, it's a perfect fit because you are a preventative cardiologist, and that's what I want to start out with. What is a preventative cardiologist?
Yeah, it's such a rare entity that there isn't exactly like board certification. You is one if you say you is one at the present time. My journey's been a many decade journey of walking the walk, talking the talk, going to courses and certifications, and mainly patient care. But it is the belief, the unpopular belief in hospitals, medical schools, and the pharmaceutical industry that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We know after all these decades a lot about what causes heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, atrial fibrillation, congestive heart failure. We got lots more to learn, and the field keeps changing. We were just chatting right before we came on about microplastics. Well, we wouldn't have put that into the equation maybe 5 years ago, and 5 years from now, we'll be talking about something new that we've identified. But for now, we got enough that your listeners can focus on, and we don't want to necessarily overload it. It's not all that complicated. So, a preventive cardiologist focuses often on lifestyle, diet, sleep, fitness, stress. Biotoxins is part of lifestyle, but a lot of it's technology, advanced testing. You can't just want to be healthy. You got to actually go out there and get some testing and prove it. And we'll talk about that. It's actually not widely known, but very simple and not all that expensive.
Well, what's so interesting to me, I was just on a different interview a couple hours ago, and they were talking about, like, well, what tests would you start with? Especially since my focus is women's health, women going through perimenopause and menopause. And I added in lipids as part of the screening test, of course. And the interviewer was like, really, in the beginning, you would start with lipids, you wouldn't start with hormones. And I thought, well, yeah, because so much changes. And I've heard you say it, I've read in your book about heart events and the percent of heart related events that are actually preventable, which is huge. So let's talk about that because people don't feel when their lipids change. They don't feel when their cardiometabolics change. So, but yet it's the number one killer. So I kind of want to remind people of the statistics out there of why this is important, why they need to listen to this podcast from start to finish and follow you and read your books because this is something that, it's not sexy, but boy, is it important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a brief Zoom call with a book agent this morning, and that was the conversation. I'm thinking about gearing up and writing a book. You know how hard that is. I know how hard it is. It takes a while. You got to have your heart in it. But she was telling me it's not sexy. Heart disease isn't sexy. There's a lot of sexy topics. Gut health is sexier than heart health, but a whole lot more people will die of heart health than gut health. So it's very true. And you can't wait. I mean, you can't wait till you're starting to be short of breath in your Pilates class or blacking out or having a burning when you're doing a Peloton ride. I mean, that is the end of the road. You got to think prospectively and proactively. And in fact, just to answer the question you asked, I don't think I've ever been asked exactly this question. Let's get it out right now. What's the one thing every woman listening, and maybe there's a man listening too? I actually wouldn't pick hormones or lipids. I would pick a test that you need a doctor's prescription for. There's a roadblock. It's going to cost you $100. That's not a big roadblock. It's called a heart calcium CT scan. And If you just think about it for a minute, women are recommended age 45, mammogram. Maybe some want to get a thermogram or an MRI, self exam. Guys get a prostate exam. Everybody's recommended to get colonoscopy or Cologuard. Done with the examination. See you in a couple of years and end of story. Where was the screening that you're on a road to a heart attack? Maybe at age 62, but at age 45, that's not a bad age to pick it up. So turns out there is the test. I didn't make it up. It was identified at the University of California, San Francisco in 1990, long decades ago, and it became very available and very inexpensive in the last 10 to 15 years. Heart calcium CT scan. Only one drawback other than $100 or $75. It's a very, very small dose of radiation. It is a CT scan, usually less than a mammogram. And you do it very infrequently. You might do it once in your life. This test might do it a couple times to 3 times in your life. So it's not a major concern. You lie in a stretcher, you go on a CT scanner, no IV, no injection, no iodine, no allergy, not like an MRI where you can get injected with something called gadolinium that some people are worried about as a heavy metal. You just hold your breath for 5 seconds, you go home, pay your money, and you get a report back to your doctor that says your heart calcium score is 0. It could be argued, certainly if you're 55, that you don't need advanced lipid panels. You don't need to know every biomarker in the world because you're not developing detectable atherosclerosis at that time point. And like a normal colonoscopy, you probably should plan to repeat the test in 5 to 10 years yearly. But if you're 48 years old and you're concerned, my cholesterol's been 280 in the past, I kind of fell off my exercise program, or you're 53 and you've gone through menopause and you're still having lots of hot flashes, which actually is a risk factor for premature heart disease, like really active hot flashing events and all. Maybe your blood pressure was up during pregnancy. That's preeclampsia, and pregnancy induced hypertension is a risk factor for heart disease 15 years later. All those events. But if you're in that fairly young range, 45 to 55, and that heart calcium CT score isn't a perfect 0, you are really in a higher risk group. And then you need all the testing, the full hormone, the full lipid panel, the full inflammation panel, the full insulin resistance panel. Nowadays, we talk about a biotoxicity panel. I mean, what's your heavy metal status? This is no longer just functional medicine, docs. It's creeping in the mainstream. So maybe we just separate people into 2 pools around age 45 to 55. Those that are maintaining no detectable heart disease, and I'm mainly focusing on atherosclerosis, heart attacks, strokes, bypass stents. And we then wrap a lot of love around those people that are showing early signs of atherosclerosis. And we can talk about how you do that, but it's going to be all the lifestyle factors and more than that. So that's where I'd start. And I tell you, of your listeners, if everybody raises their hand, we won't be able to see it and said, yeah, I've had my heart calcium CT score and it was 0. If you've got more than 10% of your audience has had that test, it's because you got a very bright audience. It's still rarely recommended by the internist, the gynecologist, the family doctor, the endocrinologist, and it's a crying shame that it isn't recommended more widely. I don't own a CT scanner, so I've ordered 25,000 of these scans. I never made $1 on them. I sure have helped a lot of people either relax or focus on a problem they didn't know about.
Now, you said this should be done probably in the 45 to 55-year-old range. Yet I feel like, you correct me if I'm wrong, heart disease is showing up younger. So should it start younger, or are we just wrapping it into that's about the time men and women start to get all of their big screening things, exams, prostate, colon, breast, etc.?
Yeah, the nice thing about this heart CT scan is every medium to large hospital in America offers it. I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds. So it's easy to get, except for that prescription from your healthcare provider. And sometimes you got to really put your finger in their face and say, I want it. Write me the script. Heart calcium CT scan. I'm going to pay for it. But if you're a 42-year-old woman listening to this, and again, could be a man, and maybe you had a little bout of smoking till you finally, saw the light and quit smoking. Or maybe you've been told in the past your cholesterol's extraordinarily high. Maybe your diet was off, or maybe you have a genetic input. Or maybe your father, your mother, your grandparents, somebody had that stroke, that heart attack that drop dead suddenly. 300,000 people a year drop dead suddenly, usually due to advanced heart blockage. Maybe you're pre-diabetic or you had that preeclamptic episode or pregnancy-induced prediabetes in the past. You might want to move it up a little earlier. The drawback is that there's a period of time that arteries are getting involved with atherosclerosis, clogging, that doesn't involve what they detect on that CT scan. It's called a heart calcium CT scan. Arteries get calcified, arteries get hardened. But before they get hardened, they have something called soft plaque, and you can't detect it on the CT scan. So you could take a 38-year-old woman with a lot of risk factors and come back and congratulate her for a calcium score of 0 and not identify that there actually is some disease there. So the other thing that is available, not as widely, that's why I didn't put it number 1. You can do a carotid ultrasound. They're your 2 big arteries to the brain. They're there for only one reason. Doctors like me to do ultrasounds of them. No, they're there for blood flow to the brain, but they're perfect. They're straight arteries. They're big. They don't move. They don't have many branches. Everything that the heart arteries are difficult to image, which is why we need CT scanners. MRI doesn't do it. Echo doesn't. Ultrasound. Treadmill stress test doesn't do it. We've got to use CT scanners. The carotids are just sitting there for somebody to take 15 minutes with a little jelly and probe, and ideally with a software called a CIMT, carotid intimal medial thickness software. Now, the problem is that's hard to find. As far as I know, in my state of Michigan, there's 2 or 3 clinics that do that. I'm one of them, but you're not going to find it everywhere. And in many states, because I am caring for patients all over the United States, I can barely find where to get that. The advantage is you can see that soft plaque. So if I have a 38-year-old woman now with some reason to be concerned, I can detect early atherosclerosis, and we can wrap a whole lot of love around that patient and lifestyle around that patient and examine and repeat the exam. Heart disease is reversible. You catch that early soft plaque and you make changes, you can come back in a year and see less of it. But you can only really do that if you're doing it in a very quantitative digital AI way, which is all available nowadays. That you don't have to wait for it, but might have to help you find that location. Or I spent a couple months a year in Florida practicing in Miami and Boca Raton. We bring the technology down there, so I can't find anybody else doing it in such a populous center as Southeast Florida. So I have to bring it down. And again, if you have clean carotids, clean heart arteries, maybe you don't need the rest. Maybe you don't need the 110 blood tests that a lot of people are getting nowadays, which I think is actually not a bad trend. A lot of people are self-paying for these big panels, hormones, thyroid, some heavy metal exposure, and a lot of cholesterol data. So I kind of like when people walk in with these big panels. But if you have good arteries, just recheck them down the road.
And apparently keep doing what you're doing, which is my next question. If somebody let's divide the categories into 0, of a score of 0, and not 0, higher than 0. So what are the people doing who come into you, they're in their late 30s, to 50s, they have a calcium score of 0. What trends are you seeing that's keeping them at 0?
It's a good question. And, it's you have to deal, as you know, one patient at a time. I can always tell a patient, if we have 1,000 people in a room and 500 don't smoke, work out every day, eat their fruits and vegetables, get their sleep, monitor their blood pressure, their blood sugar, their blood cholesterol, and 500 people don't do any of that, we're going to see healthier results long term in this group than that group. But what worries me is the exception. It's the person doing nothing right who's been given multiple prescriptions. But turns out, and I have so many of these, I had a dramatic one the past week with every advanced lipid panel abnormal and inflammation panel, and her carotids are clean as can be, her heart arteries are clean. She needed to be what we call deprescribed. I took her off the pills. We're going to work on lifestyle. And what worries me almost as much or maybe more is the person, and I'm thinking of one in particular, lives across the street from me. The yoga queen of Detroit, the swimming queen of Detroit, 108-pound body, 5'3", just ripped. I mean, always wearing her Lululemon, Peloton workout clothes. And she had a genetic factor that was not identified till I ran that big panel. Actually, we started with the CT scan. And I said, oh my God, you look perfect, but you can be imperfect inside. And The blood test revealed that she had inherited something called lipoprotein little a genetic cholesterol that everybody should have that blood test on lipoprotein little a. It's a simple little blood test, Quest Lab, LabCorp, these self-pay big panels that everybody's getting now includes them. And she inherited a lot of it. Of course, the internist and the gynecologist never checked off that box prior to I did, and we're struggling with it. So yeah, you can say I'm spot on. Unfortunately, you can fall into maybe the 20% of people that genetics are the major driver of heart disease. And until you do the imaging of arteries and then you hunt down in the blood work, you won't know that there's an ApoE4 gene that raises the risk of atherosclerosis and early dementia, or so many of my patients have no omega 3 in their blood, and that may drive up inflammation and brain fog. And it's a very easily reversible one with diet and supplements. So, I worry about everybody. So I live with this hashtag test, not guess. I really think, if I was made health czar, we'd all get heart screening starting at age 45, and then we'd repeat it at reasonable intervals. And frankly, with the cost of the CT scan, we really wouldn't bankrupt American medicine. We would stop some people from having heart attacks, bypass stents. And last comment, there's no doubt everything we talked about, and we talked about 38-year-old and 42-year-old, it all skyrockets with menopause. It all takes off when you have that year that you lose your hormone support that keeps your arteries more flexible, keeps your endothelial lining more intact, keeps your LDL cholesterol lower and your HDL cholesterol higher, and your inflammation numbers lower, and your sleep better, and your weight down. And then that all changes within 12 months, and not immediately, because heart disease typically builds up so slowly and inexorably. But by age 60, 62, I have a practice about half men and half women, and the women with heart disease tend to be 58 to 62. Now, I call that very young, as younger than me, as younger than my wife, but they can be just as riddled with usually silent heart disease, trying very hard to prevent, not stent, keep them out of the emergency room, keep them out of the stent business I used to be in. It's a 50-50 opportunity. Women get hit just as hard as men.
And I want to talk about the lab since you've mentioned a few before. Obviously, we get into a lot of the prevention lifestyle aspects of it, but let's say you do have somebody who has heard their calcium score, him or her, their calcium score is more than 0. Or it is like your neighbor where maybe they come in with lab testing, some basics that don't look great. What for all the people listening, is there a starter panel of labs that you like and then we can sort of move up the pyramid? Or is it like, no, once you hit midlife, these are the things you absolutely need to test no matter what, and then we'll come back and check on them?
It's a great question. And, I think when it comes to lab testing, in my particular clinic, we actually run people's labs through their healthcare insurance. I know other functional practitioners have kind of pre-priced packaging. I think either route is fine. And again, there are now these online companies that offer these big, big lab packages at what I think is a pretty reasonable price. So anyway, you get it. But at a minimum, of course, I will draw blood on patients whether they're fasting or not. But if I've identified atherosclerosis, I'm going to have them come in and we're going to do an insulin resistance panel, a fasting insulin, a fasting blood sugar, a hemoglobin A1C. Quest Lab offers something called an insulin resistance score that they calculate. I don't find it to be an enormous problem. Many people have said it's the biggest root cause of atherosclerosis is insulin resistance. It's clearly out there, and I probably have a pre-selected, slightly healthier population, more lifestyle-oriented population, but you got to do it and work on it. The only thing you might miss, there are some people that have pretty good numbers, but you do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test, old school approach, and you will see, or people now wear a CGM, and they'll show me, my God, my continuous glucose monitor, and look at that, my sugar's over 200 sometimes after a meal. You don't need a 2-hour glucose tolerance test if that's what's happening. That should never happen. So that's obviously there. The basics, vitamin D. Now, I already mentioned, I wouldn't call it basic, but omega-3 fatty acids. I think our functional medicine guru, Mark Hyman, put out a post recently that 41% of people are low in vitamin D. I think it's about 80% are low in omega-3 fatty acids. There are people that are allergic to fish, don't like salmon. Or, plenty of my patients are vegan, don't eat salmon. People forget their ground flaxseed. People haven't been put on supplements. They eat cashews, not walnuts. Walnuts support good, healthy omega-3. So that's important in my lab. There's 150 years ago, the word inflammation was introduced as a fundamental pathology of atherosclerosis. And we talk about inflammation, of course, of the brain and the gut and other organs, but in heart disease, it's become front and center. So there's a lab panel that's supposed to be pretty specific for blood vessel inflammation, as opposed to I have psoriasis, which is inflammatory, or I have some joint pains or gout. So there's the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. But I do additional ones. There's one called LPPLA2. Used to be called the Plaque test. It was easier, PLAC. But it's a very important predictor of arteries that might undergo what we call rupture and become a stroke or heart attack artery. There's one called MPO, myeloperoxidase, patented by the Cleveland Clinic. A lot of data. You did not want a high myeloperoxidase, predicting, again, cardiac events like stroke and heart attack. And they do get better, making the lifestyle change, replacing the missing nutrients, using some novel, both prescription and supplemental drugs. So inflammation panel is important, insulin resistance important. Cholesterol panel, I'm okay if you could just get a fasting standard panel, but for 20 years, we've had these very inexpensive advanced cholesterol panels tell you about LDL particle size, LDL particle number. Those are the two most important. There's other measures there. And we got to come back to the fact, and I know some of your audience won't know this, but there's this cholesterol particle that either mom and dad give you the ability to make in your liver, or they don't give you the ability. Therefore, it's genetic, called lipoprotein little a. It's not a capital A, it's a small a, also known as LPA. And it's found in 20 to 25% of every human on the planet. And it clogs arteries in a lot of people. It also causes damage to a heart valve and leads to a very serious condition called aortic stenosis. And you should find out, maybe your kids should find out when they're 20. You should find out at some point in your life, did mom and dad, roll the dice, and I'm 1 in 4, they got it or not. Currently, as we speak, there is no FDA approved drug to lower it. Lipitor, Crestor, forget about it. They don't do anything for this genetic cholesterol that in some people is very damaging, like my neighbor across the street. But in others, they seem somehow to be bulletproof to it, and we haven't figured out why that's the case. In the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have multiple prescription drugs. Unfortunately, lifestyle doesn't work real well either. The better diet, the better fitness, the weight loss, the better sleep are all important. They don't do much for lipoprotein little a. Old school niacin, over-the-counter vitamin, does lower it. Cardiologists have lost confidence in it. I still use it a lot. You got to have somebody guide you through it. It can drop that cholesterol particle dramatically. Okay, so that's cholesterol. There are some genetics. If you're really open-minded, ApoE, I mentioned, is a gene you inherit, one from mom, one from dad, that, depending on the roll of the dice, could influence your future risk of both Alzheimer's and atherosclerosis. You might want to know that. There's a gene that Quest and LabCorp offer called 9p21, just a blood test. Very common. It's actually the most common gene predicting future atherosclerosis. There's not much you can do about it, but a lot of people are puzzled. Why is my calcium score? Why do I have plaque? I mean, here's my lifestyle and it's been good. And you do these extra tests, and all you can do is tell them, look, it's not your fault. It's genetics. And maybe one day we'll have technology, gene editing technology. Right now, we can only explain. Homocysteine, big one, the whole methylation world, but I certainly want to see your homocysteine level at least once. And if it's elevated, your B12, your folate, your MTHFR status. But and it's easy to treat that one with a variety of supplements, so it's certainly worth checking homocysteine. You can do more. We still don't have a great test for that amazing chemical in the body called nitric oxide. Won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1998. Makes for sexual health, makes for lower blood pressure, makes for cleaner arteries. You can do a little saliva test strip you can buy online or in a doctor's office. If it turns bright pink, you're making a lot of nitric oxide in your saliva. Eat more greens, eat more beets, eat more watermelon. There is a blood test called ADMA that also reflects nitric oxide. It's widely available. little frustrating trying to move that number to better, but it impacts. Somebody comes in, I don't know why my blood pressure is up. I'm relaxed. I sleep. I eat well. I exercise. Sometimes you find something as simple as using scope and Listerine mouthwash, and they're killing their salivary production of nitric oxide. And that little test strip shows no nitric oxide. And this blood test called ADMA shows no nitric oxide. And then hormones. And you're more expert than me, but all my patients get a full panel of hormones, or they have a hormone doc and check to see where they're at. Obviously, the menopausal women, pretty predictably, we know what the hormone panel is going to look like. But some men are walking around with, God, testosterone in the basement and still functioning pretty well. And, they need to be helped.
Most definitely. What about apolipoprotein A?
Yeah, APO. So this is the big confusing thing. I find that patients will bring me their labs that their doctor ordered, and they ask their doctor. I heard Dr. Kahn on Root Cause Medicine podcast, and he wants me to get my lipoprotein little a blood test, and they bring me a different lab. It's called apolipoprotein. Now we're dealing with capital, which is a way to measure HDL carrying capacity, the high density lipoprotein carrying capacity. And there is some literature that it may be of some value, but it's not the right test. It's not what they wanted. And it's still a lack of education in primary care docs about what test to order. They'll be doing better because the drug companies are involved, and most medical education is drug company sponsored education over horrible pizza in the doctor's lunchroom. And they will be learning how to order the right test. So the future is going to get a little brighter. The other one, since you bring it up, and this is like alphabet soup, is ApoB, APO capital B, long form apolipoprotein B. It's a cool number. It's an old school cholesterol test, about $25 blood test. And it's one number, all the bad critters in your blood that cause atherosclerosis, pretty much in one number. So all the ugly LDL particles, one plus all the lipoprotein A's, plus some of the abnormal triglyceride carrying capacity particles. And it's a great one to follow over time. So frankly, we do almost all these in almost everybody, but apolipoprotein B now is in these big panels that people are buying. So people are asking me all the time, what does it mean?
And as a preventative cardiologist, are you following the reference range or do you have your own sort of tighter reference range for people?
Yeah, we have our tighter reference range. It's not even just functional medicine. It's advanced cholesterol experts around the world. For example, LDL cholesterol. In those that have disease, and classically heart attack bypass stent patients, we've been wanting to get the LDL cholesterol under 100 through diet, through fitness, through supplements, but typically through pharmacology too. And that dropped 12 years ago with data that you should get it under 70. But in 2019, a number of societies, based on new data, said we really want to get LDL cholesterol under 55 if we want to stop atherosclerosis and even reverse atherosclerosis. See that carotid look better in a year. See not your calcium score, but maybe we'll talk at some point for 2 minutes on even more advanced heart testing. You can reverse plaque. You can make plaque better. But so many of my patients now, and it drives some functional medicine doctors nuts, in town, they yell at me, they yell at the patient, but their cholesterol's 98, their LDL's 32, their ApoB's 41. And if they've got lipoprotein A, we try and get that down. And they're doing fine. They're playing canasta and they're, IT experts at companies, and they're having no visible side effects. So lower is better only in those that have disease. I almost don't care what your cholesterol is if I can prove to you that you're young inside and you're willing to come back and recheck. It doesn't harm everybody. But God, don't pretend just because there's books, podcasts, and YouTubes out there that say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in a few people, but it kills a lot of people.
And what about glucose and insulin? I feel like that's a controversial topic, especially insulin. Which should somebody's fasting insulin be under?
Yeah, I mean, ideally it should be around 80. Everybody comes back 104, 106, 102. It's like they're in my clinic. I see it all the time. It really should be around 80, 78, 84. And, and hemoglobin A1C, again, lower the better, 4.8, 5.1, 5.0. There's clear data that your hemoglobin A1C, the higher it is, the shorter your lifespan, because it just causes that process through the body called glycation. You just sugarcoat and damage your arteries, your nerves, critical organs, and that simple blood test gives you a clue about this awful process that's hardly ever talked about called glycation. But we sugarcoat ourselves because just want one more cookie.
Yeah. No, not a blood test, but what about blood pressure?
Thank you for bringing that up. In fact, I wish I had it on me. I'm so nuts. I think I've tried three, four, five different blood pressure watches. And right now, the Apple Watch, the Samsung Watch, they don't do that. There is no, widely known, the Aura Ring doesn't do it. But there are a couple watches from China that will take your blood pressure, one from England. I'm demoing one today, but I'm not wearing it right now. It's so important. I wish you could just take a moment, touch a button on your watch or some special bracelet like a Fitbit, a Whoop, and get an accurate blood pressure. I mean, more people die of elevated blood pressure consequences than any other single number around the world. As I recall, 18, 19 million people worldwide. Might be an aneurysm that ruptures, might be a stroke, might be a heart attack, might be end stage kidney disease, might be an amputation, and you don't die of erectile dysfunction, but you feel like you're dead if you have it. So it's all related. It's so critical. And it's great point you bring up. Get yourself a home blood pressure cuff. $85 on the online sellers. Good upper Velcro cuff. Hit a button. A lot of them have a program. It'll check your blood pressure 3 times in a row, a minute apart, and give you an average. Because we get nervous even at home checking blood pressure, but very amateurish. Certainly to be a heart patient without a home blood pressure cuff. We carry them in my office because I'm pretty insistent on it. I want people to go home with one, but don't wait to be a heart patient. Avoid being a heart patient. And we're talking 110/70. Just like we said, and LDL goals gotten tighter and tighter. 110/70. That's a good blood pressure. And all you women going through menopause, your blood pressure is probably rising, and you won't feel a thing. You have to test, not guess. In this case, very inexpensive. Do it regularly. Make Sunday blood pressure day, or meatless Mondays blood pressure day, or something.
I also see heart rate, which is also common, of course. You do see that on the Aura Ring, the Whoop, the watches, etc. What about a rising heart rate as people get older?
There's some data right now. The world's most popular drugs, semaglutide and tirzepatide, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and Zepbound, raise heart rate. There's some real concern about that because all the previous data is if you could pick a resting heart rate of 58 or 84, you want to pick 58. It's associated with greater longevity, greater metabolic health. Excessive alcohol raises heart rate, particularly all night long, and that's where people are seeing that data. I hear that from so many patients. I can tell when I had that third glass of Cabernet because my heart rate's in the 80s, not in the 60s. Fitness, training, bring it down. There's some fascinating data that eating beans lowers your heart rates. I'm all a fan of eating beans. I'm a plant-based human for many decades, so I have beans for breakfast. Literally, I think I did today. But beans bring down your heart rate actually like 3-4 points. And you bring your heart rate down 3-4 points every day for 40 years, it's a phenomenally powerful health advance.
That's good to know. All right. Now, before I get into the prevention part and all my questions around diet, exercise, supplements, and medications, I do want to ask you about the advanced cardiology tests. For those who were like, I think that's me, what should I ask for?
Yeah, so I already mentioned there is one drawback to that very inexpensive, widely available, everybody should have it, heart calcium CT scan, $75, $99, is that there's something called soft plaque. And you can't see it, and it's there before there's calcified plaque. There can be a lot of it that we don't see. So there was a breakthrough about 15 years ago that if you put an IV in and give iodine dye, iodine is not radioactive. You can't be allergic to it. It makes you feel hot for 20 seconds. Then you get a Band-Aid and you go home. That now is a different test. That's called a heart CT angiogram. It feels a lot like going through the $75 test. It's also usually about a $500 or $600 test. A lot of my patients pay for it because you can buy one at a hospital, but your insurance might not agree with you just wanting one to know your whole health story. But suddenly, it's like when it goes from black and white to color in Wizard of Oz, you see soft plaque, you see hard plaque, you see how narrow the arteries are. And the cherry on the sundae, the maraschino cherry was about 4.5 years ago, a software came out called Clearly, of which I have no financial investment, but I am probably one of the biggest users. You go to your local hospital, get your iodine CT heart study, and you send the images to this software company, and you get a report back. It's a whole new era of cardiology. I tell my patients, you're 11% narrowed there, you're 17% narrowed here. 72% of your plaque is soft plaque. We're a little more worried about it. It's younger plaque. Move towards heart attack and stroke more readily. 38% of your plaque is called hard calcified plaque, what we saw in your calcium score. I emailed an executive in Detroit this morning who plays tennis and pickleball and spends thousands of dollars at the Mayo Clinic for an advanced physical exam every year. And he came back and reviewed it. I said, it's great, except you missed the most important test you can get, and you have the capacity to pay for it. And he got it. And he has a lot at age 72 of soft plaque all through his arteries. And we're going to have to crunch down. I mean, he was a little reticent to make all the changes I'd been suggesting. He's not going to be reticent anymore. A 52% blocked left anterior descending widowmaker artery. I don't want my widowmaker artery to be 52% blocked. Now, he's not going to need bypass. He's not going to need stents. He's going to need oatmeal, and he's already fit. He's going to need some supplements, which maybe this is a good segue into the second part of what you want to talk about. What the heck you do with all this stuff?
What the heck do you do? Yes, because everybody thinks it's automatic medication, and in some cases it might be, but we forget the foundations, and that's why I love your book so much because your social media because you so educate on the foundations.
Right. So, what do you do about the plaque? So there's the obvious ones. If you're a smoker, quit yesterday, not today. I mean, I came across a book in the last 6 months called Alan Carr's Method of Quitting Smoking.
I've
And
s-
turns out there's
yes.
like 26 million copies of that book sold around the world, but they didn't teach me that in medical school. And it's pretty effective. I've had a couple patients recently just read that book, which you're supposed to read it and do nothing till you finish the book. Then you're done the day you finish the book. So everybody who's still smoking, go get that book and simple little paperback. If you're sleeping 4 hours a night, maybe rethink your priorities. And you may need sleep therapy, sleep evaluation, home sleep studies. You may need, everything there. So there's all the kind of low hanging fruit. If you sit in a chair all day long, get a standing desk, get little exercise snacks every hour, take 5 minutes and, do a jumping jack or do some squats or, go take a walk at lunch. All these little things matter. We've learned recently, weekend warriors. If you don't have time to exercise during the week, a recent prospective study said even getting your 45, 50 minutes in on Friday, Saturday, Sunday can make it up for doing very little the rest of the week. But don't sit. It's just bad for your health. It's bad for your back. Manage stress. Find something. Find humor or meditation or some breath, work or faith, or I use music all day long, or take ashwagandha, do something. Don't take Valium, don't take Ativan. Get therapy if you need it. I mean, manage stress. We all have a lot of stress right now in our life for sure. And the last thing before we go specific is we talked just the word biotoxins. Stop using plastic bottles, stop microwaving in plastic, stop using saran wrap and throwing it in the microwave. I mean, stop drinking hot coffee in styrofoam cups. And, there's still so much more that we're exposed to, but we can cut out, this microplastics. We now know it accumulates in our arteries and in our brain and in our sexual organs, and it's in infants. And it's a horrible problem we've created since Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate said the future is plastics, except it's come to backfire on us so badly. And I think we're just learning how bad plastics are. And there's strategies being developed right now how to remove them from the body. It's not going to be easy, sort of chelation plus. But then you get to the specifics. I just say nutrition. I mean, let's assume you understand fitness is important. There's some unique data that high intensity interval training, a couple days a week, you're doing HIIT training. I have a little bike in my basement called the Carol bike, another thing. No financial ties. It's a quick little bike HIIT protocol, a little pricey from England. It's a great way to do it. But HIIT training may be uniquely beneficial to reversing plaque in your arteries. So you got sleep, you got fitness, you don't smoke, you know that. You should try and manage your weight. I'm a big fan of prolonged fasting, mimicking diet. I try and avoid semaglutide and tirzepatide in my patients, but you can't avoid it completely nowadays. There's an interesting supplement from New Zealand called Calo Curb Ever heard of that? Suppresses your appetite with a bitter natural agent and a very cool breakthrough. Still to be proven that it results in weight loss. It clearly curbs your appetite. It's like a natural vitamin that acts like you're on Wegovy, but so far much, much, much easier to get and safer. And
It
listen,
actually made me hungry. It did not.
well, you
I
must
try
love.
everything, right? I try all the things just to see
Yeah,
because
me
I'm
too. Yeah,
geez, why not?
yeah, why
And,
not?
I was starving. I did it multiple days. I took a break, tried it again. No
Okay.
shade at all to the company. I know a lot of people who love it,
Yeah.
but I have a paradoxical
Yeah.
reaction.
Where
Bummer.
I have seen it most helpful, I like doing that 5-day fasting mimicking diet called Prolong as a age reducing, biochemistry, biohacking approach. If I take CaloCurve during my 5 days of Prolong, the 800 calories a day, just easy to get through and then go back to a healthy diet. So, but the last pillars, nutrition, supplements, and drugs, prescriptions. And we can debate all day long. I'll go on anybody's carnivore podcast, keto podcast. The bottom line is, if you really want to talk medical side, 95 plus percent of the science is whole food, plant-based diets. You know, wouldn't be a bad idea for everybody, but for those that determine that they have early plaque developing or advanced plaque, you have to give a shout out to the research by Nathan Pritikin, the Pritikin Longevity Center. That is not a ketogenic diet. That is not a paleo diet. That's in their program, 98% whole food, plant-based, low salt diet. You got to give a shout out to the fundamental research of Dr. Dean Ornish, MD, who at a very young age proved that heart plaque could start to be reversed with a whole food plant-based diet, admittedly with meditation, with yoga, with community, with walking. But the biggest component was the drastic change from the standard American diet of the 80s and the 90s. Dr. Joel Furman, Cleveland Clinic legend, Dr. Esselstyn. Dr. Ornish just took his lifestyle diet and yoga program on people with early Alzheimer's and showed in the last few months that it starts to improve memory, and very objectively measured tests of cognition and memory to replace the standard diet with his Ornish program. Very fascinating research. So nutrition is a plant forward or plant only approach. And we have no data for the ketogenic diet, no data for the paleo diet, and no really direct data for the carnivore diet. Now, Mediterranean diet always gets a big hug. It's all the lovely things we love to eat: fruits and vegetables, beans, peas, lentils, whole grains, olive oil, not butter, water, not milk, little red wine. I mean, it's a fun diet. We all love going to Italy. Do we actually reverse plaque with the Mediterranean diet? There's little clues to it, a study called Cardioprep. So I'm very tolerant of my patients eating clean, but we'll start at the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, which all incorporate a little bit of animal foods, and we'll move over to fully plant-based diets. And there's just no argument at this point. And not everybody wants to do it. A lot of chopping vegetables in my house, no doubt about it. And junk vegan doesn't work. Multiple studies show highly processed, plant-based, basically junk vegan food. All the name brand burgers we know about, the Impossible this and the Beyond That, aren't the ticket. You got to learn some home cooking skills or find yourself a place to get these foods. Again, I'm not an investor. There's a company that delivers the kind of foods that reverse heart disease. I think they're called wholehealth.com. Dr. Ornish used them in his research studies. That's why that name is sticking in my brain. Then you got that. Then you got supplements. And just quickly, aspirin, no aspirin. That's not really a supplement. But if you come back, calcium score of 0, clean carotids, or even just a little, the data doesn't favor taking a baby aspirin a day. But there are now several studies. My calcium score came back 200. Better take a 81 milligram aspirin a day. Lowers the risk of stroke and heart attack. Now, with my natural orientation, I'll let a lot of my patients take nattokinase. People have heard of nattokinase, lumbrokinase. I like nattokinase more. It's plant-based. And there is actually good data out of China of the benefits of substituting nattokinase for aspirin. But you need something like that if you have plaque in your arteries. Probably the best two, there's a supplement you can buy, a company called KYOLIC, Keolic, and they make aged garlic supplements. And I particularly like one called Formula 250. It's just pure aged garlic in a tablet. Why do I pick that? Because we know that garlic will lower inflammation, homocysteine, blood pressure, and blood cholesterol. But a really great professor at UCLA, Dr. Matthew Budoff, took people, put them in randomized studies. We're going to look at your arteries over time on placebo or aged garlic. Real science, smaller than drug studies. He didn't have, a $500 million budget, but aged garlic taken every day. And people can take it who don't have plaque, probably will improve the trend. They don't get plaque, but if you have plaque, take aged garlic, keolate, formula 250 based on good studies. Cardiologists don't know they're out there, but they're there. And there's an interesting supplement. I'll say the name again. I'm not conflicted, but there's a big vitamin company in southeastern Florida, Life Extension. A lot of people know. They make a supplement called Arterial Protect. Arterial Protect. It's got two herbs in it, pycnogenol and gotu kola. And there have been about 8 studies in Italy that combination of herbs, which you could buy separately, but Life Extension makes them in a convenient small capsule that I've been using in my clinic for a decade. But that it also, if you take people with carotid disease and you put them on it or placebo, fairly big, fairly long term studies, plaque reduction, plaque reduction, plaque reduction. And you're usually not eating pycnogenol. It's the bark of a pine tree from France. And you can drink gotu kola tea, but you're usually not eating gotu kola. It's an herb from India with a lot of interesting healing properties on scar tissue and the rest. So those big two, there is some data that omega-3, we talked about that as a lab test, but that omega-3 about 1.5 grams a day may shrink plaque. And we can talk about others, but those are like the key ones over and over in my clinic. Yeah, we could talk about our Tirasil, a green seaweed based supplement. Less data than the others I mentioned, probably works, a little bit more expensive. I just use it less in my clinic. And if they're listening right now, sorry guys, I love you very much, but I'm just being honest. We got to do some more studies. And then you get to drugs, and drugs are always a big controversy. I literally yesterday saw a patient, doc, I wouldn't take a prescription from a pharmacy. I don't care what. And this guy's got disease. All I can do is document in the chart. We talked about it and all, but there's ways to lower cholesterol without drugs. In addition to nutrition and fitness, red yeast rice, bergamot, berberine are the biggest ones that move the needle. Red yeast rice does move the needle. But for most people, going back to what we talked about 30 minutes ago, if you've got bad disease, whether you know it or you found it because of this workup or you've actually had a heart attack, and we want your LDL cholesterol to be 40, it's going to be very hard, even with oatmeal and broccoli sprouts and lentil soup, to get there. So we're talking in my clinic, super low dose statins, 5 milligrams, always with CoQ10. And there's a interesting study from Korea, a series of studies. If you use a super low dose statin like Crestor, rosuvastatin, 5 milligram, with a second prescription drug called ezetimibe or Zetia, 10 milligram, you very low doses, you get extremely good lab values, you get very few side effects, and you actually shrink that soft plaque more than being on just a supplement or just being on a statin. So in my office, they come to me as a holistic cardiologist and they walk out with 2 prescriptions and they're a little disappointed. And I got to give them the science. You got disease, you got risk. When they see their labs, they're high-fiving me. Oh my God, I take those 2 low doses and you drop my cholesterol, my LDL cholesterol by 60%. Chelation, I'll throw it out there. There's mixed data on an approach called chelation. There's a crazy supplement out there now from Australia. You put a suppository up your rear every day called Remcol. There's a lot of people that are desperate that are buying it, and it may help some people, just absent science. If you got high blood pressure, try lifestyle, try sauna, make sure you're sleeping, get fitness, magnesium, garlic. I love coenzyme Q10. I pretty much everybody in my clinic, I would recommend it because it has so many benefits and basically no side effects. Try and manage your blood sugar through lifestyle, but berberine, bergamot, bitter melon, fenugreek, there's all kinds of approaches to natural blood sugar, but it's so important to try and hit these targets. And it's frustrating for people. Lately there's just been an epidemic of like hemoglobin A1Cs of 5.9. They used to be 5.6. It's like going in the wrong direction. These people are working hard. I swear it's environmental toxicity because their diets, their weight, their sleep, things seem to be on track. Now, statins can raise blood sugar, no doubt about it. And I will work with people hard that have a unexpected high blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, to lower the statin dose. Maybe we take 2 months off, see if we drop dramatically the blood sugar. We have other drugs for cholesterol, but the insurance companies fight us because they're expensive. The two I mentioned, rosuvastatin and ezetimibe, are very inexpensive.
Well, speaking of medication, last question. What about women who go on hormone replacement therapy or men who go on testosterone? Does that help this whole scheme?
You get your prescription and you open the instruction package from the FDA, and it has a big black box warning that older men should be very cautious about testosterone therapy if they have cardiovascular disease. So there's that aspect of it. But in reality, we've known for decades that properly selected and dosed testosterone therapy is beneficial on endothelial function, arterial function, and little snippets that it's probably beneficial for longevity. So I put my heart attack patients back on their testosterone therapy after they've a couple months of recovery, and we watch them. They don't need to live the rest of their lives low energy, sexual dysfunction. They can get back on. Now, I always try and work with their lifestyle and ask, why is their testosterone low? I use a lot of maca for women, and maca for women, premenopause, menopause, maca for men. I love that line of products from Symphony Natural Health.
Of course, yeah. What about women going on? You put them on estradiol as part? Is there, especially either perimenopausal or if they found out all the heart markers are a mess?
I've got, sitting on my desk in my office is that book called Estrogen Matters. That
One of my faves.
Yep, will break through the resistance they have, or what their gynecologist told them about all the dangers of HRT. I may farm them out to somebody super special. With some great HRT docs in Detroit, but I'm a big advocate, big fan. I have a 92-year-old mother. I think she's been on HRT for 30 years, and I tell you right now, she could fix your computer. Her brain. I think a lot of that is just really, really well-balanced hormone, decade after decade after decade. We talked about lipoprotein A. One of the ways to lower lipoprotein A, okay, great. I found out at age 58, I got a high lipoprotein A level, is hormone. And that's how you spell the word. That's a little book that I wrote that's sitting there. But lipoprotein, little a, is hormone replacement therapy lower in women, less certain in men, lowers lipoprotein A. So it's a strategy to try and get it down.
Amazing. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation and very needed. Again, I know you have been talking about it for decades, but just in the menopause space where I'm in, every time I bring it up, it's nobody wants to focus on it. It's like, no, I want to talk about my hot flashes or my hair loss or my weight gain. I'm like, yeah, fair. Absolutely. I feel you. And we have to talk about longevity, and cardiometabolic health is part of it. So I want everyone to know where they can find you.
Kind of you. I live in southeastern Michigan, Detroit suburbs, although January, February, I'm in Boca Raton. I see people in about 25 states by telemedicine. And you just go over to a website, drjoelkahn.com, drjoelkahn.com, and you'll see clinic, and you'll see podcasts, and you'll see blogs, and see videos. And I don't sell too much stuff, I sell a little bit of stuff, so you can buy it all, but don't worry about it. I'd rather just take care of your health than get whatever you need somewhere else.
Amazing. And he's written a number of books like this one, and he's all over social media.
Thank you. Yep. That was a fun one. That one became a national PBS special, which I don't know if those are going to continue on, but at the time, that was kind of the ladder you tried to climb and get a national PBS.
Well, for those who are listening, not watching, it's your whole heart solution. So what you can do to prevent and reverse heart disease now. And he was absolutely ahead of his time in the book. I've read it cover to cover.
And look who wrote the inscription at the top of the book. Who's there?
Mark Hyman himself.
Mark Hyman wrote.
Yes,
he thinks I'm too vegan now, but we had a little bro love fest for a while.
Too vegan now. Well, again, Dr. Kahn, thank you so much for coming on the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for your good work.